And welcome to another episode of Talks Within the Nine-Sided Circle. I am one of your co-hosts, Mushtaq Ali, and
I'm your other co-host, Nor Kyle.
And tonight we are going to be picking up sort of where we left off from our talk on Nafs and talk about ruh, which means spirit or soul or breath in Arabic. And we thought that it would be interesting to just give you a bit of an overview on what would be the generative. Yes?
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to make sure that I have hosting privileges.
Oh my God, don't you have hosting privileges? I'm a terrible person. You should have hosting privileges. What's wrong with me? There we go. Boom.
There.
You have hosting privileges. I think it's because you showed up so late. I was so excited to see you, I forgot everything else.
Yeah, it's actually... Okay, there we go. All right, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go for it.
What was I saying? Remember, I'm old. I forget things easily.
You know, I actually am not able to make the changes I want to make. You made Zoha co-host, actually.
What? All right. I don't see... how did I make Zoha a co-host?
All right.
There, I got it all sorted out.
Okay.
Now, everybody on YouTube, all 5 people who watch us are going to see what flaky people we are.
And hopefully they'll love us anyway.
Hopefully so. So, here we are, coming to you from beautiful downtown planet Earth, the plague spot of the galaxy, where the entire planet is in lockdown over this coronavirus silliness. We have people here from 1, 2, 3 countries or more. 4 countries. 4, yes. And various states, and we're all screwed. And you know what? We're having a good old time. So a few announcements before we start. If you're watching this on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel yet, please let me invite you to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so that you can know when we put out new videos, which for the time is going to be pretty much daily. We're doing short videos every day during the craziness that is going on to help people cope with being locked up and having their social life go out the window. And this will include 6 short videos a week and this one. So
yeah,
every day.
We're calling that series Huddle in Place with the Nine-Sided Circle.
Yes. So you can huddle in place with us. And we'd be happy to have you. What other announcements?
That's the big one right now.
Yeah, that's the biggest one. Everything else is on hold because of not knowing if anybody's going to be alive in a month.
Real talk.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be that bad, but in places it's bad. Spain is having a horrible time right now. Yeah. We should all keep the Spaniards in our hearts because the plague is hitting them very, very badly.
Italy, France.
Yeah, Spain is catching up to Italy right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, the entire world needs our prayers because this is not fun. Yeah. And as much as people try and minimize it, this isn't the flu. And with any luck, we are going to have our good friend and member of the circle, as well as other things, Dr. Bill Ernohazy, who is, how do I describe it? He's a physician who has so many certifications, I can't even probably list them all in the hour that we have to talk. But we're going to have him do a talk with us. We're going to do an interview with him on the latest information on the coronavirus and what you can do to keep yourself safe. He is working down in Florida right now, screening people for the virus, as well as taking care of his regular practice. He's a wound care specialist right now. Spent years working as an ER doc, so he has huge amounts of experience. And he will have some good things to say. And hopefully we'll have that up as soon as he has a spare moment and enough sleep that he can actually speak coherently.
Yeah, and I just want to invite people to send us questions you might have that you might like to ask about things that we can do.
Yep.
You know, anything that comes to mind, and we will ask him as many questions as
he has time for, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And it's I'm very touched that he's willing to take the time out of the insanity that he's dealing with to talk with our community and the community at large, because we will put this out everywhere.
Yeah.
Dr. Bill is extremely well known in the HEMA community around the world. And so
That's,
hopefully,
for people who don't know, that is historical European martial arts, right?
Yep. Yeah, he is a master level fencer in long sword and rapier and side sword and all of that kind of good stuff. And so because everybody knows him, it will be good for him to speak because people will listen. So anyway, back to what we're talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about developing the ruh, the spirit, and why would we want to, and what would we get out of it? So, what is the ruh? Ruh literally means breath, just as nafs does. And whereas nafs is created in your body and is a set of patterns, ruh is inspired, which is to say it comes in from the outside and becomes part of you. It is very pervasive. You find it in the entire person, in your body, in your mind, in your soul, in your emotions. All of this is infused with ruh. Ruh is the breath of life, as it were. And just as there are 7 layers of nafs, there are 7 layers of the ruh, but they're very different. They go from the mineral to the vegetable to the animal to the personal to the human to the secret to the inner secret. Those are the 7 levels. And there's a very famous poem by Jalaluddin Rumi that describes these 7 levels, and I'm going to read that to you. He said, "I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and became an animal. I died as an animal and I was a man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as a man, to soar with angels blessed, even from angelhood, I must pass on."
All except for God doth perish.
Thank you. I'm having trouble reading tonight. My eyes are quite bad these days.
Would you like me to finish it?
Yeah, would you please?
Sure. When I have sacrificed my angel soul, I shall become what no mind e'er conceived. Oh, let me not exist, For non-existence proclaims in organ tones, to him we shall return. And that's by Rumi, who lived from 1207 to 1273, and this was A.J. Berry's translation.
So there Rumi describes the passage through the 7 layers of the spirit. He doesn't mention person, and so we should say something about that. In between animal and man is what is being called in English person. And what that is the sense of I-ness. Because the sense of I-ness comes even before full humanity. Cetaceans seem to have a sense of I. Certainly the other higher primates, the gorillas, the chimpanzees, the orangutans, they all have a sense of I. And so that seems to be a necessary step to humanhood. So when we look at this, and we look at ourselves, mineral is represented by our bones. You know, our bones are rocks, and they connect us to that level of reality. Vegetable, interestingly, is our blood. Do you know why vegetable is our blood? Yes, no, maybe? Nobody?
Any guesses? Any thoughts?
Okay, so.
Okay, here's one.
Sure,
moving
go for it,
fluids.
Say again?
Moving fluids.
That's part of it. Let's look at chlorophyll. If you put chlorophyll and hemoglobin next to each other, they are very, very similar. The main difference is where you find a copper molecule in chlorophyll, you find an iron molecule in hemoglobin. And so our blood is kind of equivalent to the chlorophyll in a plant. So that's basically why blood. Animal is our muscles. Animals are the creatures that move. So the animal part of our spirit is found in the muscles and the tendons and the ligaments. The personhood, the I-ness, is found in the cortex. The human part of us is found in the neocortex. And the secret and the inner secret are so secret that I can't tell you where they are. But let's just say they're sort of in the brain and not at the same time. So that's how we understand those. Now, how do we work with them? So there's a concept that's called Tajalli Aruh, which means the disclosure of the spirit. Through work, you got to do work on the Lataif al-Sita, the subtle centers. Now, the Lataif are a Sufi concept that was probably stole from the Magians, from the Zoroastrians. It definitely originated in Iran rather than in Arabia. And it is the idea that within your soul, within your ruh, within the body of your ruh, there are subtle centers. And these are not like chakras. These are not physical. These are spiritual centers, and they don't really have a particular location, but we think of them as if they do for just because people need to do that, I guess. You know, and there, for our purposes, there are 5. And the centers that we work with are the heart, called qalb in Arabic, the ruh, which is the breath and the spirit, the sir, which is the secret, the khafi, which is the hidden, and the ikhafa, which is the even more hidden. Do you follow that so far?
Mhm.
So each of these has a subtle sensibility to it that you want to cultivate. And you cultivate it through 13 specific practices. And I'm going to go over those with you. The first practice is called irada, and it's the practice of will. Irada means will. And what will means in this place, in this point, is to use your will to actually pay attention to what's real rather than to your mechanical responses.
And an example of this in practice, especially from the past couple days, was yesterday we discussed intentional retreat. In a situation where we're all being asked to stay in one place, we can perceive that as something happening to us, or we can understand it as something we are choosing to do.
Yes.
That is intentional.
And the moment you choose to do it, you have power over it. And that becomes one of the practices that you do with this. It's the practice of choosing. So rather than mindlessly brushing your teeth at night before bed, you stop for a moment and you go, oh, I choose to brush my teeth. I intend to brush my teeth. It is my will to do toothbrushing. It is my will to sleep. It is my will to wake up, to actually make a choice to do what you're doing. If you do that for a week, I can pretty much guarantee you that your entire life will change.
How do you feel it would change?
Pardon?
How would you describe that shift that might happen?
You will feel way more in control of your life, and you will notice when you are not willing things. Your camera went away. There you are.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I'm having some connection issues, I think.
Yep. Because what will sometimes happen is you go, I will myself to do this. I have the will to do this. And yourself goes, wait a minute. No, you don't. You don't will that. And that's the kind of things that you're looking for.
So what should be our response then?
Our response should be, should I will it? Or do I refuse to will it? Do I want to will it? Do I refuse to will it? And if you refuse to will it, then don't do it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you'll end up losing a few bad habits this way, which is kind of cool. So the second practice is called istiqamah, and I translate this as integrity. Integrity means it should be taken in 2 ways. The first way is to, as we usually understand integrity, to be a good, honest, forthright individual who does what they say and says what they mean and all of that sort of thing. This is very important. That's the outer aspect of integrity. The inner aspect of integrity is literally to be integrated, to begin to bring the parts of oneself together.
Could this be like being a well-rounded person, but on a deeper level?
Yeah, it
in a
would be
deeper
like
sense?
you have a part of yourself that behaves in a particular way, and you have another part of yourself that behaves in a very different way.
Yep.
And you introduce them to each other. You allow them to become one thing rather than two. And then you have the choice of doing that or not doing that, whatever that is.
Yeah, and then you're less likely to have this sense of yourself where, let's say you have a day where you behave in a chaotic way and you think, this is not me. It is you. You just haven't become acquainted with that part of yourself, making friends with it and helping it go in the direction you'd prefer. You don't like those behaviors.
Exactly right. And that gives us to the third practice, which is called Heya, which in religious texts is usually translated as shame, but it doesn't mean that in this context. This context means humility and self-respect. Those two have to go together. Humility without self-respect is degradation. Self-respect without humility is ego inflating.
Mm.
You have to have a balance between the both.
Yes. And the way I've conceptualized this is, not being, there's nothing to be ashamed about when it comes to the core of who you are. And you are that way intentionally. At the same time, we don't have to puff that up. We don't have to break it down. It just is what it is. And there's nothing inherently shameful about it.
Exactly. So the next practice that we work on with this is called Huraya, which is translated as freedom. Freedom is very important. Without it, you're basically a machine. And the practice of freedom is actually related to the other practices that I've just talked about. And this is where you consciously evaluate your options and you choose what you're going to do, regardless of what you're told, regardless of what any holy books tell you to do, regardless of anything. And you take responsibility for those choices. And if you're not willing to take responsibility for your choice, don't make that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a hard one. I think a lot of people find that challenging at first, but that's the thing.
Yeah, pretty much everybody.
Yeah. Just to step back for a second, Cherie comments that we shy away from showing vulnerability, and I'm thinking that was in response to humility and self-respect, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's true, because if you are humble, you're vulnerable.
Yes.
But if you have self-respect, that's your armor against that vulnerability.
So let's say a little bit more about freedom.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, traditionally, how was this understood? I'm trying to recall.
Well, if you mean by traditionally what the mullahs say,
Yeah,
yeah, they usually parse this as the freedom to obey the commandments of God.
right. And
Yeah,
this is not that.
this is definitely not that. Because it's amazing how often the commandments of God align themselves with the commandments of the mullahs. Did I say that out loud?
Mhm.
Yeah. Um,
Nancy asks a really good question there.
yeah. She says, if we practice those virtues, do we also make it easier for other people to practice them?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
And
say yes,
yes,
absolutely, definitely.
and you have the extra added advantage of drawing people to you who are prone to practicing these virtues as well.
Hmm. And it certainly makes it easier when you're not alone in the goals that you've set for yourself. You can encourage one another. You can, uh, hopefully in a very kind way, because that is part of this. Help each other and catch where you slip up. And you can bounce ideas off of each other to clarify what these things might mean to each of you.
Yep. So the next one, fatut. This is one that always, I laugh at this one because the literal meaning of the word is manliness. And that's not the definition, which is quite interesting. This has nothing to do with being what we think of as manly. So I do not define it that way, nor did my teacher, nor does Kyle's teacher. Uh, how we define this is working in service to that which is greater than oneself.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with gender at all.
No,
None,
no.
zero, zip.
It means it's inner strength. That's what this one's about.
Yeah,
Being strong within yourself, standing up for what you know to be true, and to
and
serve others
yes,
without subservience.
exactly. And when you are in a true state of service, you do what is right. The true state of service is hard to achieve, I should mention. So this gets us to 6, which everybody misunderstands too. Hub, which means love. This is the practice of love and loving kindness. We did a whole talk on that, and I'll put an end note, an end tag somewhere up here in one of these two sides that will link you to that talk if you want to go back and refresh your memories, which you should do because it's a great talk, if I do say so myself. So I think Kyle did most of the talking. Did you do most of the talking on that one?
I honestly don't remember. We should
Neither
check
do
it
it.
out
Yeah,
again for
we will have to
ourselves.
check it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, loving kindness towards all creatures. This is probably one of the best practices you can do. If you only had one practice that you could do in your life, this would be the one. It will take you places. And that means you regard all living things as possessing of subject, as having ruh, as having the divine breath of life in them. From the smallest, most annoying mosquito to the gigantic sperm whale.
Yeah.
And if you have to crush the mosquito, you can do it with love in your heart. Still crush that little bugger, but don't be angry at him when you do it.
Hmm. Marcelo asks, is metta practice related?
If I am understanding you right, yes.
That's a Buddhist practice,
Yeah.
correct? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of loving kindness is realizing that we are all connected, that life is a web. And when we think about the 7 layers of ruh, like even down to the mineral level, that's still part of the web of life. This is all connected.
Yes. And this does not mean that you have to be a vegetarian, because plants have spirit too.
Yeah.
No plant wants to be devoured.
There's no way around that. I mean,
Yep. No, life lives on life.
yes. The sharing of energy cycles around and around and around.
Now, 7 is one that is also horribly misunderstood. Abudia, which literally means slavery. But this is not what we mean when we say this. What we mean is a willing alignment with universal will, or an intentional alignment with universal will. And the ultimate level of that is this thing that I stole from a dude named Adyashanti,
Yeah.
which is allow everything to be as it already is.
Mm.
When you do that, you find the true meaning of being a servant.
Yeah, and you're basically working to make your actions align with the best actions possible, as well as you're able to.
Yep. So 8 is Morakaba. We often translate that as meditation. We did a whole talk on that as well, and I'll put that up on the other side from the other one. And that is to focus and to be observant of one's inner workings, to actually pay attention to what your Nafs is doing from the position of your spirit.
We've talked about that as the watcher within.
Yep. Number 9 is called dua. Dua means prayer. And this is not the prayer where you whine to God about the things that you want. This is not, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? My friends all have Porsches, I must make amends.
I love that song though.
Yep, this is not that. Real dua is not begging God for stuff. Real dua is aligning yourself with whatever you understand is that which is greater than you. We say God because it's handy. If you want to be an atheist, you can still do dua, because the universe itself is greater than you, and you can use that as what you align yourself with.
Yeah. And it's best if that comes from the heart. Like
Yep.
if it's a heart connection, a heart relationship,
Yeah,
reaching out from the inside out.
that's exactly correct. Now, number 10 is a hard one for people. Number 10, the practice is called faqar, which is the abandoning of materialism. This doesn't mean that you have to give up your stuff. It means you have to give up your attachment to your stuff. You have to give up this romantic relationship that you have with your stuff. I know people who would rather break up with their mate than to give up their car.
Mm.
So the attachment to material things is the problem, not the material things themselves. Everybody needs to have transportation, whether that's a car or a bicycle or a horse or your feet. Maybe you just need a good pair of shoes. Doesn't matter. What matters is that you are unattached to that. You do not act as if anything that you possess belongs to you. You act as if it were lent to you by the divine reality. This is not my home. This is the home that God provided for me. I'm renting this from God and my friend Alan.
And again, God can be whatever
However
metaphor
you
you like.
understand that.
Yeah.
So, number 11, Tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is actually the proper name for Sufism. Sufism is a name that we got from the Orientalists. And number 11 is the path of the Sufi. And as one of the great saints said, or wearing a dress of no material significance. You've heard Kyle and I say that the uniform of our tariqa is a t-shirt and blue jeans, or a t-shirt and leggings in the case of Kyle. And that's because that's about as plain as you can get. It has no significance. In the winter, you wear a sweatshirt. And this is a little bit symbolic, but it's symbolic of not dressing yourself as somebody important. Everybody has these images of Sufis wearing, every order has its own hat. We usually call it a taj, which means a crown. And every order has its colors and its coat and all of that, except us. We don't do that. And well, there are other orders that don't do that anymore either, but it's the idea of do not wear your piety on your body. Keep it in your heart. If you are truly on the Sufi path, it doesn't matter what you wear. It doesn't matter how you look. It doesn't matter what job you have. It does not matter what material things you have or don't have. People will see the light of the path in your heart, or they won't. And nothing that you can wear, no outward sign will make any difference. And that's hard for people to come to for some reason. Thoughts, Kyle?
I mean, we talked earlier about how it literally is not about what you're wearing.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, it's almost like how you wear it, the attitude you bring to it. And, you know, I had a thought with him that, you know, I was like, sometimes I dress to be seen, and it's still, though, it's the attitude I bring to it. I'm not trying to outshine other people. I'm not trying to dominate them visually or, you know, status wise through what I wear. And for the most part, I don't dress ostentatiously anyway. I don't even know if that's the appropriate word for it. But in any case, yeah, we are not a Sufi community that tends to wear any kind of sense of status on a sleeve, literally or figuratively.
Yep. No turbans. You go to a museum Sufi group and all of the leaders have these humongous turbans, these giant pointed caps, and that way you know who's who,
Yeah.
know who to genuflect to. We prefer that you don't know who to genuflect to so that you treat everybody equally. That's one of the reasons that this is so important, is if you go into a room and there are 10 people there and you don't know who the cool head leader person is, you have to treat everybody like they're the leader. Or you can treat everybody like they're scum, and both will get a reaction. And that,
So,
go ahead.
no, finish your thought. What were you going to say?
Oh, no, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Mr. Kim is going to say, the path of the Sufi. Does this also mean to join any specific order?
It does for some people. And you usually know when you find where you belong. And yeah, I have a pretty strong experience of this because I found my first teacher and then I was with him until he was killed during the Iranian Revolution. And then I went years without a teacher. I mean, you know, I hung out in the Sufi communities because that was kind of my home. And all of the teachers would have been happy to have me. And many had offered to let me take their hand, as it were. And I never felt like it was the right thing to do until I met my second teacher. And I knew when I met him, it was not a question of, oh, should this be my teacher? It was like, yeah, this is the guy. This is the guy I've been looking for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So
Does that help answer
yeah.
your question, Mr. Kim? Yeah, good.
Good. And that gets us to point 12, the practice of subat. Subat is working in the community, working with a community, working with a group. It comes from the same word as sobet. This is a sobet right here. We are having a conversation. Group work is incredibly important for helping you reduce your ego and strengthen your spirit. And then the very last thing that we do is called adab. Adab means manners. And this is not outward manners, but this is inward manners. And this goes back to what I was saying a couple of minutes ago about treating everybody as if they were the hidden teacher. There are formal manners that you can have, which you need to know if you are in a particular place in a particular time. And then there are the inner manners, which you carry with you at all times. Does that make sense? So this is a general outline of how one works with Ruh. This is the generative work. And yes, I know I haven't given you specific steps because that has to be tailored to the individual. But the cultivation of the spirit, of the building of the soul, as we say, because that's literally what this is. You're building a permanent soul by doing this. Follows this line, at least in our line of teaching. So, any questions now that I've laid all of this heavy stuff on you?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, if you have any questions, Kyle will answer them.
Oh, I'll answer them. Okay. Yes. And always feel free to unmute yourself so you don't necessarily have to type everything.
No, as a matter of fact, we prefer if you don't type everything. Or you can.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah,
No, I was thinking is is how's zikr related with each level, or is each practice is
Some practices, a teacher will give you a particular zikr to go with it, and it will change for each practice.
And for those who aren't familiar, zikr is like a recitation, like a repetitive mantra.
It literally means remembrance.
Yeah.
To remember. And
so
go ahead.
I was just going to say, it may not even necessarily take the form of a verbal recitation, but
at its highest level, it doesn't.
Right.
But yes, there are specific practices for each one of these stages that must be crafted to the individual. There is no one size fits all in real Sufism.
No. Your path is your own. Your ruh is your own. I think one point to make about it is that there's the universal essence, and then there's ruh, which is your individual essence. And it's a very special thing.
of ruh related with the levels of nafs?
You were breaking up. Can you say that again?
How's this the level of rules related with the levels of nafs?
They're only generally related. So when you're working on nafs, you're doing repair work. You're fixing stuff that got out of whack. The ruh is not necessarily out of whack. When you're working on that, you're doing generative work. But the basic rule of thumb is the quieter your nafs is, the easier it is to work on ruh.
Thanks, Mr. King, for those questions.
Yeah, those are good questions.
Anyone else?
I was wondering whether treating people with loving kindness is last because it's the most difficult.
It's up there in difficulty, yes.
Yeah, Mushtaq, would you say there's an order to these, or are they all kind of equal in value and not necessarily?
The order is pretty much that which is given, though you will work on several at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is a progression.
Okay.
Because when you get to that point of adab, it is really hard. If you haven't done the work before, it's really hard to have the inner adab.
Yep.
We all know that. I can remember many times back in my misspent youth when I was outwardly being very proper and polite and inwardly calling the person I was talking to a complete and utter buffoon, idiot, and fool.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. Don't. It's not a pretty sight. Marie, you were going to say something?
I recognize the universal similarity between Christianity and then Buddhism. These are the things that I've been exposed to before. And now your list is very similar to the instruction and directives I've been given in both those other systems. How do you feel this is set apart from those two other systems?
It's only set apart in the sense that the approach to the training is a little bit different. Yeah, this is absolutely universal stuff. Every prophet from the beginning has come and given the same message, and this comes from the same message that Jesus was giving. It comes, Siddhartha Gautama and all of the other Buddhas figured all of this stuff out. So it's a matter of the spices and flavorings you use is all. Does that make sense?
Yes, I like it. I like the fact that people from all different cultures and backgrounds can come back to this
Yeah.
thing, this essence, this understanding of a higher self and how to override that human nature of not demonstrating loving kindness
Yeah.
to
It's
those
go ahead.
pressure.
So my teacher said years ago to me, and this has stuck with me ever since. He said, Jesus came and he taught Sufism. He taught this to everybody. And it was too hard. People couldn't deal with it. And so it had to be toned back. And I always found that an interesting thought, because if you look at the actual teachings of Jesus, if you read things like, Matthew 5-7, the Sermon on the Mount, nobody's going to do that stuff. It's like way too hard. But it's exactly the same as this.
Yeah, we all have different vantage points where we're coming at this from, different angles. We're observing this this whole selfness from. And so we bring that vantage point in all of its textures and everything to this focal point that we all share. And I think that's why we have so many different paths that head towards the same, similar, if not the same, concepts and goals and aspirations.
I kind of feel that, the emphasis of nothing special, no special clothing and adornment and airs and graces and speech habits and all those sort of things allow people to be able to come together instead of setting apart. You don't want to put yourself apart in such a way that you would interfere with someone reaching this understanding.
Yeah. So if you think of a picture of some Christian priests, Catholic and Orthodox, all duded up, and some Jewish clerics, some Jewish rabbis, and all, in the hats and everything, and Muslim clerics, wearing their long robes and their big beards and their huge turbans, and all gathering in a room together, and the Hindu guys with the paint on their foreheads and all of that, and they're all together and they're all huddled separately because they can all tell who's with them. Whereas if we look at, say, this group, for example, nobody knows who's with what, right? I mean, Ilmar and I are members of the Graybeard Club, but other than that, that's the only similarities in the group. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. The putting on of adornment and costume separates people.
So, Mushta, we're going through what's probably a very interesting transition in this world right now because of the virus and the pandemic and so forth, And as the poet David White puts it, one of the things that's happening, I think, is that quite a number of people are finding the old conversations that they've been engaged in with themselves and with the world becoming trite almost, and not really speaking to the current situation. And that there's now maybe an opening to a different kind of conversation, maybe a deeper conversation, one that comes more from the essence of us rather than our peripheral mind, which is dealing with the everyday necessities and everyday practicalities. And I'm wondering whether this outline of categories that you presented, how would that apply to a transition from one mindset to a possibly quite a different new mindset? How would it facilitate that? How could it be used in that context?
That is an excellent question, because that's what this is designed for. It is designed for moving from one context to the next. And if you look at what each of these emphasize as practices, you can break it down into basically three things. Each of these practices either emphasize the intentionality of the person, the freedom of the person, or the person's conscience and ability to connect with and treat the other with loving kindness. And I think those three qualities are what will get us through this transition. I actually wanted to mention the transition that we're going through, because this is what we call in the work a universal shock point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is not just any universal shock point. This is a sixth shock.
Mm.
This is the heavy duty one. And either we fail and everything collapses, or we succeed in getting through the shock and things get better.
Yeah.
And we need to know that. We need to know that we have to intentionally surrender in a certain way and allow that which is greater than us to give us the energy to get through this. That we can't just do it on our own, and we can't just do it with the regular kings and princes and leaders of the countries and all of that. They have no power over this.
Absolutely not. And this is such an opportunity for opening and for maturing, just like Ilmar's talking about. And it's an opportunity not to be wasted. It's for us to embrace as well as we're able to. And I think some people are frozen in fear right now. And that's really hard. It's an opportunity to talk about faith as I've written about in my blog, and maybe people might want to revisit that, but it's not necessarily the faith of becoming hopeless and helpless and giving up, but it's the faith of knowing that holding on is worthwhile, trusting one another, building each other up, seizing this as an opportunity, savoring it as an opportunity. This is a terrifying moment, and it's okay to be terrified, but it's important not to get frozen there.
Yeah. And it is a great time to learn to practice empathy. Mm-hmm. One of the most heart-wrenching images that I've seen from this is one of this little old lady, probably in her late 80s, all stooped over in a walker, standing in front of a bunch of empty food shelves, just looking at them. And it was heart-wrenching. It was incredibly sad. And I wish every person who decided that they needed to hoard 100 rolls of toilet paper had to look at that image every day.
Just thinking about it hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the vengeful part of me. That's not the loving kindness part. But I have to admit that there is still a little bit of that in there. But on to better things. Ilmar.
I was wondering also, I mean, often when there are these sort of major transitions going on, I mean, usually we deal with the world through some kind of a story. We have we kind of try to make sense of it through some sort of a story. And I think in our culture for a long time, it's been kind of a mechanical story. Here are these productive machines and we exchange them, and the driving force is maximizing profits and so forth. And it now seems like there's a possibility of moving to a different story, a different understanding, a more of a relational and organic understanding. And I wonder whether your tradition has anything to say to that also, and whether
Well,
these categories that you give today give us a way of, I think you're suggesting those categories give us a way of fostering that transition.
yes.
Yeah.
And what I would ask you, I mean, I can wax elegant and pedantic on that all night long, but I'm wondering, what story would you tell, Ilmar? Because you're in on this too.
As the news story?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's certainly one that I don't have articulated, but it seems that some of the elements certainly are relationship rather than the sort of possibly American but a Western ideal of, I'm going to do it myself, and I
Yeah.
need damn help, I mean, the communication and organic interrelationship, that where we realize our dependence upon other parts of people and the universe and the planet. Those seem to be the elements that are coming to the forefront. We're beginning to see the weakness of the somewhat mechanical systems that we've put up. I mean, they're having a tough time dealing with the whole health crisis. They're going to have one hard time dealing with the economy when it collapses after this. So I don't have a articulated story. I wish I did. I mean, I think there's very much the occasion for developing such a story.
Yeah, I think that this is something that we're going to have to figure out all together.
Yeah.
Because it can't be my story. It can't be Noor's story. It has to be our story, and we all have to tell it.
Right. So how do we foster? I mean, what's enough? I mean, it seems to me almost that at least in my universe, I mean, my sort of attempts to rationally come up with a model are kind of out of place. It's almost like it calls more for an authentic dance, an authentic music, something of that sort, something that's
well, do you remember what you have to do to get through a sick shock?
No, I don't.
You have to seek grace.
Oh.
And if you want to know the story, if you want to know the dance, it has to come from the higher to the lower. You have to receive grace. You have to receive inspiration to find it. You cannot think your way out of this one.
And the only way I know to tap into that is to sort of allow myself to sink into sort of a deeper, not so much a sense of self, but a deeper, I mean, it's not something external to me. It's something that I was sink into rather than.
It requires a surrender. And this list of practices, if you were to start going through them, you would find what you need in one or more of them to get you to that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's my contention anyway.
Okay. Well, can you maybe go through some of those and give some illustrative examples of how they would apply in this situation?
Well, let's look at hub, at love, loving kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Just experiencing that in your everyday life when you have an opportunity to interact with somebody, to choose to act from that space rather than any other, means that you are in a state of surrender to that. You are setting your ego aside for something greater.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The idea of dua, of prayer, in this case, that would be opening yourself up and sending out the request to be connected with that which is greater than you, to be the receptive force to its active force.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the alignment with the universal will thing that we mentioned there.
Yeah. And certainly the community that you're building is
Yes.
a great example of that.
Yep.
That's our intention. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I can't, if I said what I really feel about our little community, people would be embarrassed because you're all that cool.
We get the warm fuzzies with you guys.
Yep, we do.
Yeah.
And those warm fuzzies, I think, are especially important these days. I mean, I can't physically hug
Yeah.
somebody right now,
Yeah.
but I can do a warm fuzzy with you.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that's how I am dealing with this distancing thing, is we can still feel those feelings rise inside our bodies.
Right.
And that's powerful. That's valid. Yeah,
Very much so. I mean, I miss the embrace of a tango, but you
of
know,
course.
there's yeah, very good. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Anyway.
it's a challenging time in that, as I've read in some opinion articles, that when we're going through such a shakeup like this, all we want is to hold each other close. And we can't for so many reasons. And that's what makes this such an extraordinary situation. But as Aaron says, yeah, he's grateful that we can still all be here, and I feel the same.
Yeah. This is one of the times where I am really happy with technology. Zoom is an incredibly useful platform for this. And it's allowing us to communicate with you and with each other, and staying in contact even though we can't be physically present with each other.
And I think that's very important. I think it demonstrates in a very clear way that our relationships are certainly much more than physical intimacy, even though I consider physical intimacy very, very nice and very important. You know,
We're all for physical intimacy,
right,
but what we have is something even deeper than that, you might say. Well, as usual, we have run over time.
We have one more question from Mr. Kim I'd like to
Okay.
touch on. He says, is the goal of the practices so that we could have more experience with spirit ruh? With spirit, aka ruh? And how do we differentiate from the experience of ruh and the experience of nafs?
The answer is, you want to answer that, Kyle?
Well, the goal of the practices is for us to cultivate our ruh so that we can experience it more vividly, so we can live through our ruh, so that our actions reflect ruh and ultimately reflect the divine essence through our individual essence. And how do we differentiate from the experience of ruh versus nafs? I think that might come back to the subject-object relationship. Are we still working and functioning through a subject-object relationship with ourselves, with other people, with the universe at large, or are we having a subject-subject relationship? When we achieve that, when we find ourselves able to navigate our reality through subject-subject relationships, that's when we know that we're coming from a nafs, from the nature of ruh. What do you think, Mushtaq?
I think that that's exactly right.
Yep. And does that answer your question, Ms. Dickey? If it doesn't, you can, yeah.
Nancy has a question here too.
Yeah. Nancy asks, how does adab affect how one thinks about or treats high status people who are behaving very badly?
The same way that it affects how you treat low status people who are behaving very badly.
And what should that be?
Act in such a way that corrects them without hurting them.
Okay.
That's hard.
It's really hard.
Shuri, did you have a thought? I see you unmuted. No?
I was going to say something like, in that case, I would correct one of my little nieces if she's mouthing off or something. I would say, is that the kindest thing you can say? And that might bring her to rethink about what she's saying or misbehaving or the behavior. Is that the best thing you can do? You know, so it's a correction without shaming, but making them think of something better. And I was thinking about the key word for me in this talk is about rejuvenation. And to experience higher grace is to see it in action in other people in the community. And by being able to follow that example and you get to experience grace, you actually start generating that yourself to be able to bring that forth. That's where you can experience the grace. We actually follow each other's example. And so being able to immerse ourselves in that versus wallowing in Nafs. So you just want to be always building that up, that grace. It's being grateful and gracious and humble and self-respecting, and say, you know, to someone who could be saying, oh, don't speak to me like that, because you have enough worth in yourself to say, that's enough now. What's the kindest thing you can say? What's the kindest thing you can do? So automatically seeing someone wounded and hurt, you're going to see examples of people around you like that all the time now. So what's the best thing to support them? Instead of pulling apart people who are going to react, I'm taking all those toilet rolls because I'm helping my family. But the family we are in is the big human family. And it's only through our example to help people recognize that we are using this grace.
Thanks for that, Shuri. Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
All right. So we should probably be wrapping this up. Let me remind you that every day you will find something from Noor and I that will hopefully help you get through all of this. And I encourage all of you to think about what you could do to encourage the community, to keep the connection.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And remember, you can use Zoom to video conference with anybody for free, even with their free account.
These are amazing times, you know,
Yeah.
best of times, worst of times kind of thing.
All right, with no further ado, I am going to say goodnight to you all.
Bye, great to see you all. Stay well.
And we will pick this up again next week.